Hello and welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho, and sitting in for Shaka Ssali is my colleague Vincent Makori, the host of Africa 54. Vincent, welcome to Shaka Extra Time.
Thank you very much. It's a delight to be here.
A warm welcome to you all our Facebook followers watching us live here at the Voice of America. Shaka Extra Time is a show that comes to you every Tuesday where you get to ask questions. Shaka Ssali is off. But today we have a remarkable gentleman here by the names of Vincent Makori, who is sitting in for Shaka Ssali. He will be taking your questions. Let's maybe start by talking about some of the major stories that have been breaking on the continent. But particularly, let's talk about corruption in South Sudan. There's this documentary that came out, a three-part series, that highlights the depth of corruption in South Sudan. Yeah. It was actually done by another remarkable journalist from Kenya. You probably know the guy more than I do.
Yes,
bring us up to speed.
Yes, Namo did an amazing job. Alan Namo did an amazing job exposing this corruption in South Sudan, and it is something that everybody knows about. People know that there's corruption going on, but nobody knows the extent of the corruption and the way it happens, and the web of the corrupt in people and systems that are used in order to facilitate the corruption. The most amazing thing about this this documentary is that actually takes you to South Sudan itself, then takes you to the neighboring countries, because it's so critical in that to tell the story of South Sudan's corruption, you have to tell the story of what's going on in the neighboring countries, namely Kenya and Uganda. And what Namo manages to expose here is that there are those who are enabling corruption in South Sudan. And why that is important is because with the corruption persistent in South Sudan, it is almost impossible to attain the peace that is much desired there. So John Allen Namo manages to take you to these three countries to expose how corruption in South Sudan has fettered because of the enabling environment in Kenya and Uganda, where the corrupt people steal billions of dollars, invest them in different forms in Uganda and in Kenya, and continue having a good life there along with their family members.
It's interesting in the sense that earlier this year I was in Sudan, last year I was in Uganda, and it's interesting to see brand new cars all registered with South Sudanese registered number plates. The people driving them are sometimes Kenyans or Ugandans. But it was interesting how this guy, this reporter, managed to go dig deeper and figure out where is the money coming from, who is aiding and abetting this practice to go on.
Yeah, this is what we call investigative journalism. Indeed, it is one of the toughest form of journalism, where you really dig deep into these very complex stories, because they involve so many people in so many different places. So there's a cost to it, there's a risk to it, because imagine, as you can imagine, nobody wants to be exposed. And it's so difficult to literally confront a person and say, I'm doing a story about corruption in South Sudan, and you've been accused of stealing monies from South Sudan. So you have to use so many methods of getting information from those who are involved in it, but also those who are probably enabling this, who are abating this. It is a remarkable job that has to be commended, and it's a kind of coming at a time when you feel that investigative journalism is dying across the continent of Africa, because most media houses in Africa are taking the cue from the big networks of this world in the US and in Britain, where people are spending a lot of time just kind of just sitting in studios and probably bantering about the political ongoings in the country without having an opportunity to delve into the implications of some of the things that are happening behind the scenes, like corruption, so many other social ills. So what Jonah Allen Namo has done, and along with so many other journalists across the continent who managed to do this job, is really to give us a taste of what is almost starting to fade away, real investigative journalism which can hold people accountable by exposing what they're doing behind the scenes.
How would you respond to maybe people who say that perhaps investigative journalism is not dying away, it's just that the institutions are maybe shifting those resources to some other places or something that doesn't require a lot of funding? Because a story like this really takes time, it takes money, you need resources, you need manpower to pull it off.
Indeed. I mean, that is the reason. It's cheaper to do this kind of new form of journalism where you have 7 people in the studio just talking about what so-and-so tweeted today or what is going on between politician A and B. It is cheaper. You're not sending people out there. It is safer. And media houses are making a lot of money without having to spend too much going out to do serious journalism. But the unfortunate part is that the whole purpose of the media as the fourth estate was to hold leaders particularly accountable and also to expose the actions of those who are causing much harm to society. And therefore, there's a duty and a responsibility to media houses to invest in real, serious journalism. Because if you don't do that, then you become nothing other than just a platform, perhaps for political players, where you basically having people sitting down and representing the different political interests in the country and just keep talking, and then you miss out on the real core role of journalism, which is to go deeper, expose what's going on in society so that there can be debate about them and people can be held accountable, and then we can hopefully change how things are happening.
Okay, let's go to some comments. Maybe I'll combine 3 comments. Let's start with Hassan Adan in Kenya. He says, is it true that African politics is seen as a source of wealth for most politicians? And maybe first respond to that.
And you know what? There are some who have argued, oh, this also happens in other parts of the world. But the truth is, in many African countries today, the quickest way to getting extremely wealthy is to join politics. If you succeed in becoming a president, if you become a governor, you become a senator, you automatically have access to wealth. And how is this wealth acquired? Again, you can tie it to what we just talked about, corruption, because this is wealth that comes by literally taking easy money from government coffers, by taking land that belongs to the public, to the citizens of a country, and personalizing it. And we've seen this across the continent of Africa. So many people now aspire, in fact, to join politics because it's the easiest way to become a wealthy person without working so hard.
Let's stay on corruption. Now let's go to Precious Abagan from Nigeria. I believe the corruption level in Nigeria is steadily rising. President Buhari does not seem to be fighting corruption. What do you think about that, Vincent, especially in light of the fact that when President Buhari was campaigning, he campaigned on the platform of fighting corruption. And to this day, corruption is still very, very prevalent in Nigeria.
We have to acknowledge that just like a number of countries, corruption is a major cancer. But corruption in Nigeria is monumental. And of course, Buhari came to power vowing to fight corruption. To his credit, one has to be fair to Buhari. Just in May itself, there was an announcement of about 603 convictions on corruption in Nigeria. That was like more than double the convictions that were reported during the time of the former president, Goodluck Jonathan. Buhari has tried up to this point to really fight corruption. It is under his leadership that we've seen the Economic Commission, or rather the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission of Nigeria, convict a former governor and have him sentenced to 12 years in prison for corruption. And there are so many, when you go through, if you've been paying attention to what's going on in Nigeria, under his leadership, there has been judges, politicians, powerful men who have not only been arrested and charged, but whose monies, the monies that they saved in overseas accounts, has been repatriated. Now, to be fair, given the enormity of the issue in Nigeria, given the population of that country and how long this corruption has been going on, he's kind of just scratching the very surface of it. But he has shown the propensity to fight corruption. Now, what will determine whether his will be considered a successful war? It will be how consistent and persistent he will be, at least throughout his leadership. By the end of it, he may not eliminate corruption, but he may probably entrench a culture of no tolerance to corruption.
But how about the people who say that this could actually cost him a re-election because there are a lot of people who are not eating, to use that word.
And that is the biggest challenge of fighting corruption, because there's so much pushback. Remember, corruption is all about stealing. People use these words, corruption, misappropriation, and whatever. It is about stealing public funds. Now, there's so many people who want to steal. There's so many people who want to get this easy.
Is it just about stealing public funds?
You steal public funds, you take public land, you take government properties. There are places where people have literally taken houses and buildings that used to belong to the government and take them and then personalize them and sell them. And because they have seen how others have benefited from that, they also want to benefit. So they resent any politician, any leader who may come and try to fight against that kind of effort for them to acquire easy wealth. And so you can understand, it's a fight that could lead to deaths. A person could actually be killed for trying to fight corruption. So one has to understand that it's not an easy war. And Buhari, of course, to his credit, I think there's something he has been doing. But he may not necessarily win this war, not today, but he probably will start a war, something somewhere.
Let's move along. There is another interesting documentary that just came out of Liberia. The More Than Me Too CEO, Katie Mailer, resigned today after allegations are surfaced in the pro-Republica and Time magazine publication, alleging that the people who are entrusted to protect these young girls, one of the workers of this US-based NGO was actually raping these young girls. Your thoughts about that?
Oh yes, I mean it's one of the heart-wrenching kind of stories, and we really have to give credit to this yet another investigative journalism here. What I know is that we have such kind of sad stories across the continent of Africa where people have formed these NGOs, but there's no proper oversight, and pedophiles and other people who are sexual exploiting children have wreaked havoc across African societies. And many times because there's no close monitoring by the governments of these countries. Because what happens, because many governments of Africa have decided to give a free rein to some of these NGOs, they don't hold them accountable because they are recipients of aid, and therefore they don't feel like they need to monitor and question and challenge how these places are being run.
But wait a minute. In fairness to that point, I like the argument you're making, but there is very, some of these NGOs are heavily monitored. There are some countries where these NGOs can just break in.
Well, they may come and set up, but once they show that they're giving, they're providing free education or some free kind of programs to local kids, the monitoring I'm talking about is who is questioning when one guy spends some crazy amount of time with the little kids. Who is around there to say, under what circumstances do you spend time with these children? How do they spend their nights? There were cases I know. There was a case in Kenya, for example, where a guy formed an NGO, and of course he got all the government support to set it up. But what did he used to do? He used to go at night and pick up one of the girls, a girl every night. And these are kids who were orphans, and go and sexually exploit them. Who was there to monitor the activities of this guy? Who was questioning, you know, how he related to these kids day and night? So it is a very sad tale, but I can guarantee you across the continent of Africa, there's a lot of sexual exploitation of children, especially orphaned kids, poor kids, in the name of them being helped by, whether it is international or local NGOs.
So, so what does this now say about most of these NGOs that we see propping up? Every now and then we see an NGO. I mean, when you look at the credentials of this NGO, even the people who run it, there is really no doubt that they mean good. They are there to do good. But at the same time, they have to partner with local people who actually do the work. For example, in the case of Katie Mailer here, she lives out here in the United States, so she had to partner with a local person. So how do you balance the two?
I just have to say that perhaps not to be looking at everybody suspiciously, but I think even what we've seen with sex exploitation even in the Catholic Church, time has come when people have to realize that you can't just trust anybody's children, your children, to somebody. Just give them free access to their children and let them do whatever they want to just because they're providing help. So this NGO may have a very noble kind of goal of helping poor kids, helping orphans, helping kids who are being used for sexual exploitation on the ground. But when it comes to real monitoring and supervision of the program on the ground, you cannot just trust people's children, our children, to some guy, to somebody, just because we're getting help. People have to question what do we know about this person? Where has he been? What is his, you do some kind of background research on this person. But also there has to be other systems of making sure nobody's exploiting someone's child. I mean, it happens. Teachers have been known to exploit their students, kids. Priests are doing that. So it's not about just this particular NGO, but it's just a question of saying we have to keep our children safe, and especially the most vulnerable, by not 100% trusting people who spend a big amount of time with vulnerable children.
Earlier you talked about the role of government, and when you sometimes maybe government is overstretched. How do you police, or how do you police something that is non-government related? These are non-government organizations. How does the government come in?
That's why the government has to take it also as its responsibility and duty to take care of their children. This is about your kids. And so it doesn't really matter that this is a non-government organization. There has to be some method, some system by which you can require and demand accountability, especially as far as security is concerned. Just the same way, how many private events take place even in the United States? But we have the police, literally taking care of the control of crowds and all that. Everything doesn't have to be a government-run project. But when it comes to safety, that is the safety of our children. You cannot allow even one kid to be exploited because it's a private thing. The safety of the children of any nation is a responsibility and the duty of that particular government, regardless of how overstretched it is, because we cannot afford to have even one child exploited, damaged forever.
You make a very good point. A reminder that you are watching Shaka Extra Time. It's a show that comes to you live every Tuesday here at the Voice of America. Shaka Ssali is off, and my colleague Vincent Makori is filling in for Shaka Ssali, and is taking your comments and questions. Let's go to something more lighthearted. Now, two American pop stars, Kanye West, or commonly known as Mr. Ye now, and his wife, Kim Kardashian, in Uganda to shoot a new album. They've also met with the Ugandan president, a long-time president of the republic, Mr. Yoweri Museveni. And today they were seen, they posted something on their Twitter feed, distributing shoes, nice sneakers to some disadvantaged kids.
Yes.
What do you make of that?
Well, first, and they have new names now in Uganda. President Kaguta Museveni, Yoweri Kaguta Museveni gave them new names. Kanye now is known as Kanyesije, which means peace, is it? No, trust.
No,
I trust.
I trust.
I trust.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Kim Kardashian has the name Kemijisha.
Kemijisha, which means she's blessed.
She's blessed.
Yeah.
And she's blessed with probably many things. Now, here's the deal. I look at that guy and his wife as serious business people. Kanye is you can think of what you want to think about him. Some have said things about, people should look at his mental state. But I think he's a smart guy. He's a very smart business person. For the last 2 weeks, maybe it's coming to 2 weeks, I think everybody's talking about Kanye West. Everybody knows about, even those who never knew about Kanye West. They're talking about him. He made sure every American media outlet talked about him going to the White House. And then he made this big announcement. He said, I'm going to finish up my video in Africa. He's in Africa today. We've been talking about Kanye West. For me, all this, it's all about business. And as we know, any publicity is good publicity, especially for a person in showbiz. They're in showbiz, and all they want is their attention, and their attention may drive people to their business, to the music, to the performances, and of course to any other business, especially that Kim is involved in.
You talked about him, you talked about the two as being a business savvy, but there are critics who say that maybe they're more attention-seeking.
And in the showbiz, it's about attention. When you think about it, what do people want when they're trying to succeed in show business? They want publicity. They want the attention. Attention makes people know you. Attention makes people take interest in what you do, in your music, in whatever brand you have out there. I think it can come both ways. It can be a two-edged sword, but at the end of the day, that is what all people in entertainment look for. That's what people in the showbiz look for. Attention. And they make you talk about them. And that is what exactly everybody has been doing for the last 2 weeks. And I think for them, it is good.
Yeah, I'm just getting some feedback here saying that our show is not streaming live. I don't know what's going on. Maybe we'll find out after the show. But before we leave that topic, what is the significance of their trip to Africa? Just going to promote, to shoot a musical album? They're not the first people to shoot a musical album in Africa. They're not the first celebrities to travel to Africa. Yeah. So what's the significance of this trip?
For him, of course, first it does create a little bit a distraction from what's going on in the United States. It takes him to another place, makes people think of him in a different way. He's a man trying to connect with African roots, and also kind of has people can see him doing other things, going to the park, going to the national park and seeing animals, going fishing with his wife. There's a family thing there that makes him look like a guy who is close to his wife and his children. But I think it is also a good distraction for President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. People are now not paying attention to what's going on politically because they can spend a few days talking about Kanye West and his wife there, but also mimicking Museveni, receiving them, and in a way, I think it does create a good distraction for Museveni himself.
Let's go to another Facebook comment here. Why is it that African leaders, when they're talking about some of their failures, they try to justify some of the things that they have done wrong, or come up with excuses? What could be the reason behind that? Instead of maybe working on hospitals, roads, or service delivery for that matter, they come up with excuses.
Yeah, I mean, that is exactly the bane of African development. The reason why the content might take so long to push forward is because the African leaders, first, they are so complacent with very little development, but they they distract from their failures by making references to others who are doing worse than them. And by not doing that, it means you're not aspiring to do the very best. You're not actually looking to be the very best in this world. Rather, you are content with very little development, and you justify poor governance, justify corruption and stealing by pointing to other regions of the world. They're very, very good at saying, well, there's corruption in other parts of the world. Oh, well, look, if it's a Kenyan leader, I remember for many, many years, a Kenyan president used to remind people of how messed up Somalia is, or there is war in Congo. But you see, if you want to achieve and attain the very best, you do not compare yourself with the worst or with the ones who are doing worse than you. You look to the very best, gauge yourself with the very best, and work as hard as possible to achieve the very best. So escapism, destruction does not help these countries do the very best, attain to their full potential, but instead you stay where you are and where you've been for years.
Let's go to another quicker comment from Nora Redfan. Why do African leaders borrow money they won't be able to pay back?
Because many of this do not think about the future. They are focused on themselves and today. And remember, so much of this money, where does it go? It is actually stolen by some of those leaders. It's stolen by the leadership in that particular government. They do not many times care about what's going to happen 20, 30 years later. That will be the burden of their grandchildren. But it doesn't concern most of them. That's why there's no debate. There's no discussion about what's going to happen to the money we are borrowing today.
But one could argue that sometimes they borrow money to build infrastructure. Most African countries have a deficit when it comes to infrastructure. They borrow money to do these projects.
Yeah, but they have borrowed so much money that in so many cases, and you can go to the case of Nigeria, where there's so much money that was put into so-called infrastructural projects which stalled, but the money disappeared. So anybody who wants to borrow money, you and I, if we want to borrow money, whether we want to buy a house or anything, we sit down and draw a budget and ask ourselves, first, can we afford? And if we really truly borrow this money, how do we pay it back? You have to talk about how you're going to pay it back. And then you have to make sure you put it to good use so it really is worth whatever the sacrifice that you may make as an individual in paying back this amount. Over the years that I've lived, how much money has been borrowed that never went to do whatever it was meant to do, but has gone into people's personal pockets. And who's going to pay for that? Nobody on the continent is sitting down and discussing with the citizens about this is the money we want to borrow, and this is how we will pay for this particular project and how we pay back the money.
Vincent, we are almost running out of time. What are you talking about tomorrow on Straight Talk Africa?
Tomorrow we're talking about land reforms in Africa. We know the big challenge of the injustice of colonialism, where most land was taken away by force from Africans and taken by white colonialists. In the case of South Africa, those who stayed on, the whites continued to hold most of the land. In Namibia, it's the same case, and Zimbabwe. So we'll be talking about how best can this issue be resolved? How can you ensure that you can actually get land back to the indigenous Africans without violating human rights, also of even those others like the whites who stayed on and held on to this land? What is the best way forward? Because you cannot deny now all the whites and the blacks of Africa belong to that continent. What do you do?
But very briefly, do you think this is the time to be talking about land issues, especially when you look at what happened in Zimbabwe in 2000 when they brought up the land issue?
It is the best time to talk about it, but you have to look at Zimbabwe and say, perhaps that's not the best model. So every time is the right time to talk about justice. Land issue is about justice. When you have 80% of South Africans not having land and the smallest minority holding most of the land, it's a question of justice and inequality.
Well, on that note, I thank you so much for being a great guest. I look forward to hosting you on another edition of Shaka Extra Time. Until then, so long from Washington. Vincent, once again, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
He stopped